Okay, we are ready to proceed. I'd like to move to the next submission, which is an oral presentation by the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility, as outlined CMD 15H 5.11. And Dr. Edwards, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Binder. Can you hear me okay? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, fine. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the licensee and the CNSC staff for reducing greatly the emissions of tritium into the environment. I think that's certainly something to celebrate. On the other hand, I think we have to acknowledge that it was through interventions that these problems were brought to the attention of the CNSC, which led to the monitoring and the work that has subsequently been done to lead to these improvements. And this monitoring is really the direct result, I believe, of citizen intervention. As a result, I think that a 10-year license is way too long. I think that there's no way that this plant should be granted, in my opinion, more than a 2-year license at a time, so that we can see what is happening. We can really see whether these projections that have been wrong in the past may turn out to be wrong in the future. Although we've heard evidence to indicate that the monitoring is so well done and the modeling is so well done that it is impossible to be very far off in the numbers, I remember quite vividly that just a few years ago, it was discovered that the sister plant, the Tritium Light facility in Peterborough, Ontario, the SSI facility, it was discovered that they had been underreporting their tritium emissions by an order of magnitude for something like 18 years, and that in all those 18 years, the CNSC had never caught this. So it makes me feel uneasy about these kind of assurances, that the CNSC is so good at their job, the CNSC staff is so good at their job, that nothing can get by them. I simply don't believe that. I also think that if there's a too long an interval between licensing intervention periods, then the Commission does not have a chance to review what the staff is doing, what the licensee is doing, and to form their own judgment as to how well things are proceeding. So since the commissioners are really the ones who are ultimately responsible under law for protecting the health and safety of citizens and the environment, I do think it's important for them to have these processes. Before I go any further, I'd just like to put in a couple of factual points. Earlier it was mentioned about the permissible level of tritium in Japan. I have looked at a record from 2014, May 28th, 2014, and apparently it is 1,500 becquerels per liter. They had measured 1,700 becquerels per liter, which was over their maximum limit in one of the monitoring wells. So it was not 10,000 becquerels per liter in Japan. It's 1,500 becquerels per liter. I'd also like to go on record as saying that tritium is, in fact, a nuclear explosive. It's simply not a primary nuclear explosive. That is, indeed, you can't build a nuclear weapon with tritium alone. But the secondary nuclear explosive is ignited by the primary nuclear explosive, and it more than doubles the explosive power of an atomic bomb, a fission bomb. And as a result, it is the key to miniaturization of nuclear weapons and therefore the deliverability of nuclear weapons. And it is also the key to making the transition to fission weapons and H-bombs, the fusion weapons. So I think it is extremely important, regardless of whether it is not in the same category for sure as plutonium and highly enriched uranium, but it is extremely important now that we have rogue states that have developed nuclear weapons but may not have ready access to tritium. This tritium traffic is very important in that regard. Now, I'd like to point out that history has shown that we have made mistakes in the past. You know, the first example of illuminated dials and so on, radioactive illumination, was the radium dials of the past, and they have been phased out. They're regarded now as having been a mistake. When I was a kid, we had these foot machines. You could look at your toes wriggling in your shoes through an X-ray machine. That's been phased out. It was regarded as a bad idea as well. We had lung X-ray machines that would pull into the parking lot at schools, and all the children in the school would go through and have a lung X-ray. That's been done away with as regarded as much more risky than any benefit that it offers. Radioactive heart pacemakers using plutonium have likewise been phased out. So I think that we have to bear in mind that this whole idea of using tritium, which is really a waste to begin with, it's a nuclear waste product of CANDU reactors. If you go onto the OPG website, they make it perfectly clear that the only reason they built the tritium facility was not to create a market for tritium, but to safeguard the workers and the citizens and the environment by segregating and sequestering this dangerous material. And on their website, they say that we are safely storing it, sequestering it from the environment. Now we have a private company which, with the licensing of the AECB and then the CNSC, is taking this waste byproduct and basically spreading it around. And all of it ultimately ends up as waste. It either ends up in a licensed waste facility or it ends up in a landfill. Or, God forbid, it might end up in a nuclear weapons program. But the fact of the matter is it was already removed and safely sequestered before. I think that in the opinion of the CNSC, in the opinion of the CCNR, the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility, we feel that it was a mistake to give this company a license in the first place to liberate this sequestered waste product and make it into a much more problematic situation by polluting the local environment and also polluting distant environments with these products. Be that as it may, one thing seems clear to us, and that is that the city of Pembroke should not have to bear the brunt of this nuclear radioactive contamination from such a plant. If the plant could operate in a more or less hermetically sealed manner, if in fact the radioactive emissions were truly negligible and truly exceptional, that they only happen very rarely and in very small amounts, then one might consider it as a possibility to operate in a residential area or in a small community like Pembroke. But given the fact that it's by its nature, it's a fairly difficult operation to try and contain this tritium gas, and so quite a bit of it does escape, it would be much more appropriate for it to be moved to, for example, Chalk River. If that's where the stuff is ending up anyway, if that's where the licensed facility for the waste products that are returned are there anyway, why not have the whole facility there? So I believe that the CNSC, in its role as protectors of the public and protectors of the environment, should be exerting strong pressure on SRB Technologies to phase out their operations in Pembroke and relocate them to another site which is more appropriate, maybe adjacent to the Darlington tritium removal plant, where they can incorporate these fabrications right there on site where the tritium is removed, or at Chalk River Laboratories where the waste ends up. But I remember as a professor at Vanier College when the Student Association approached me and said they wanted to make Vanier College a no-smoking facility. I thought, wow, that's going to be very difficult because so many students are smokers and even the teachers are smokers. How are we going to bring about a smoke-free environment? Nevertheless, it was done, and everybody is very happy about it. We have a smoke-free environment. Nobody argued that we should determine what should be the acceptable number of cigarettes or what should be the acceptable level of secondhand smoke. Everybody agreed that we should do away with it, not that we should have an acceptable level. And I think that it is common thought in the medical community that if you have a carcinogenic agent of any kind, an agent which is cancer-causing or mutation-causing, that the ideal situation is to have zero exposure. And that's what one should aim for. Because contrary to what some of the staff people have been saying, that you have to have huge exposures to perhaps millions of of becquerels before you can have harmful effects. This is simply not a scientific statement. In fact, Dr. Mueller, who won the Nobel Prize in genetics long ago, demonstrated that the harmful effects of radiation apply right down to the very, very lowest levels, to single-cell exposure of single nuclear radiation incidents. In fruit flies, you can have mutations caused at that level. Also, the Beer report, not the Beer 7 report, but the Beer 5 report, which had to do with non-penetrating alpha radiation, and in particular with radon gas, they pointed out that there's no reason to believe that a single radiation incident with a single cell could not be a precursor for cancer, because we now know that cancer is usually monoclonal in origin. That is, it begins with a single damaged cell, which then replicates and becomes a cancer. When we hear evidence that some cells are possibly benefiting from exposure to radiation, I think these cancer cells would also think that they have been benefited, because they're very vigorous indeed. They can reproduce like crazy. But that's exactly what makes them a cancer. It's because they're wild cells. They're cells that reproduce very rapidly and endanger the host body that they're in. So I think that this non-scientific idea that because a little radiation may be helpful to a large number of cells, that therefore we shouldn't worry about it. I suppose somebody might have argued from the tobacco companies that maybe a few cigarettes would have been beneficial. If you just smoked a few cigarettes and not too many, perhaps it would be a good idea. But that's not why cigarettes were banned. Cigarettes were banned because they're killing people. And radiation is also limited primarily because it can kill people through or cripple them through radiation-induced cancers and other diseases. So I do think that the company should be really strongly pressured to move away from Pembroke and to move to a facility which is more appropriate for it to be there. I also think that the commissioners should reflect upon the fact that their role is not only not to promote nuclear power, nor to justify nuclear power, nor to defend nuclear power, but to defend the public and to defend the environment. And consequently, I think the commissioners should take a cue from those who have said that there's no such thing as an acceptable level of asbestos. Asbestos should simply be avoided insofar as it is possible to do so. That's why they took asbestos out of brake linings of automobiles, because even small amounts of asbestos in the air can cause deadly diseses. In a similar way, I think that the Commission should not be thinking about what is an acceptable level of exposure to a known cancer-causing element, but how can we best protect the population when these exposures are really not necessary? They don't have to be where they are, and in fact, perhaps they don't have to be at all associated with the enterprise that SRB has chosen to engage in, which is really marketing our dangerous radioactive waste material, which was already sequestered by OPG and taken out of the environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I was just going to say that we were way beyond the 10 minutes, but thank you for concluding.
Okay, thank you.